of society, of the economy, of democracy, and that it's giving voice to everyone, leaving no one behind, promoting innovation, and contributing to wider socio-economic and political development. These priorities cannot be realized without knowing the lay of the land. They cannot be realized without a cohort of actors committed to the cause. They cannot be realized without opportunities for dialogue and deliberation on what works and what doesn't work. And of course, without a conducive policy or legislative environment. In this context, CPESA works to continue to respond to a shortage of information, research, resources, and actors that are consistently working at the nexus of technology, human rights, and society. Some of you are aware of our flagship projects, including the Forum on Internet Freedom in Africa, which marked 10 years last year, the State of Internet Freedom in Africa report series, which is an annual research publication, and also marked 10 years last year. The ADRF, which is the Africa Digital Rights Fund, a sub-granting initiative and one that's a core of our movement building of digital rights advocates in the continent, is our toddler, a little bit of a toddler, a couple of years old now. All of that, as well as the work of our collaborators, are a key plank in this special edition of the report on a decade of digital rights in Africa, reflections and insights from 10 changemakers. The report recounts some of our own work, but also that of our collaborators who you're going to meet very soon. And all of them have been instrumental in shaping Africa's digital and internet freedom advocacy landscape over the 10 years. We are truly honored and proud to be associated with them. And you will all be hearing from these changemakers over the next hour or so. We hope that the insights and perspectives that they share, as well as those that are captured in the report, will continue inspiring and informing the quest for greater internet freedom in Africa for 10 years to come, 20 years to come, 30 years to come, and many, many more years to come. I won't bore you any further, and I'll hand it back to Rihanna Masters, who is the host for the day. Thank you so much.
Thanks very much for that, Ashna, for giving us a background on CPESA, and also welcoming everyone to this very, we hope, vibrant, interesting conversation. And that's what it's going to be. It's going to be a conversation with the change makers who have contributed to the report, A Decade of Internet Freedom in Africa, their reflections and their insights. So I was going to say, do the broadcasting thing and say, in the studio with me, but, with Zoom, we now can be placed all over the world and still be in the same space, cyberspace. So I welcome Dr. Grace Gitaiga, Emila Gandhi, Edison Ojo, Benga Sassan, Arthur Gwagwa, and Dr. Tabani Moyo. As you know, the report on internet freedom in Africa is often very, very futuristic. It looks at the issues on the continent, and the research that CPESA has been producing over the last decade, along with many of the influential digital rights advocates and experts on the continent, has been trend-setting, but it also is a benchmark from which, a lot of us do our advocacy work. So, it is greatly appreciated. I'm going to start off the conversation with Benga Sassan and ask, that while taking note of your observation, when asked what are the emerging threats and challenges on the continent, you talk of ignorance and apathy. So, I'd really like it if you'd unpack that statement for us, as someone who's been diving into digital rights issues from policy right through to implementation and working across the continent. What is the intersectional thing or the big issue that will have, one, a positive impact in the digital rights sector that we should examine or advocate for? And what will be the negative, issue that we need to prepare for? And I ask that question so that you can kind of, dispel the ignorance and apathy that that we've been accused of.
Thank you so much, Rihanna. And my apologies that I can't turn on my video just yet. I will join the meeting 100% full shortly. The ignorance and apathy is actually not an accusation. It is a an admission of what we have to do and some of the gaps that may stop that. We can't deny the fact that we are not where we were 10 years ago. Right now, things are very different. It used to be that we were always fighting fires as digital rights advocates, but that is a bit different right now. So one of the greatest things we've seen is that there's a lot more documentation, as you can see from CPESA's report, and many other organizations, including mine, produce annual reports that document some of the issues that we always used to complain about. But now they're documented, and they're not just documented. We also have the opportunity of taking action. So it's not just at a place where we complain and just fold our arms and say, oh, what can we do? But right now we've come to a place of opportunity where increased challenges also signal the need for a lot more citizens to take action. What we've seen, for example, over the last 3.5 years, well, I can't say thanks to COVID. COVID is not a great thing, but what that period did was that it placed a lot of emphasis on the need for us to acknowledge the role of digital in our lives. So what we've seen over the last 3.5 years is the fact that the more repression you have, the more attention that comes to that particular location or to that particular subject matter area. In terms of resources, in terms of attention, in terms of people, we have a lot of that happening. So when I speak of ignorance, I'm speaking of the fact that there is a lot of ignorance on the part of some of our stakeholders, including in some cases, policymakers. And I'll say why. If you're in a situation where there's COVID, where you need digital access, you're acting against your own self-interest and you're being ignorant if you're clamping down on the same digital space that you need to amplify for your citizens to connect to opportunities. And so that's what I was, referring to when I talked about ignorance. And I think that the actions that we're taking already are great. And I, of course, look forward to the opportunity for us to network many of these, similar actions that we're taking to look at a trend. For example, all of the reports that have been produced over the last 10 years to look at what the trends are and be able to spot, what the next few years may say. So when I speak of ignorance, and of course also apathy, unfortunately, apathy on behalf of many citizens who don't pay attention to the violations until it touches someone they know. But increasingly, we have a lot more interest in the issues. And like I said, over the last few years where we've had COVID and other major things, including now the emergence of AI, people are paying attention. We have less ignorance, we have less apathy, and a lot of digital advocates are taking advantage of this to do a lot more important work. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. That's very insightful, and I'm glad you unpacked that for us. And you're very correct in saying that there's so much more documentation. In my own work, I know it's been easier to look at, the work of CPESA, your organization, Paradigm Initiative, and be able to extract information from there that really helps to advocate for change. And you're setting me up very nicely for the next question, which I'm going to pose to Editon. Editon Ojo, the Executive Director of Media Rights Agenda, you've been a prominent advocate for advancing media rights and internet freedom, but you're also known for your strategic vision and dedication to media freedom. You've been engaged in a lot of strategic litigation to push for these rights. You've also been a key, player in shaping not just internet policy frameworks, but also, other frameworks on the African continent. So for me, the question, and I ask this because I know of your work and I know how instrumental you have been in doing this. What is an entry point that will ensure that our governments take on board? Because, as Benga said, many people who are crafting some of these policies often tend to be ignorant of what they're regulating or, regulating in such a way that they, constricting the very space that they need to work in. So from your expertise and, your having been involved in many of these initiatives, what is a good entry point for people to make sure that they're heard and that we actually get governments to listen to us and to take on board what we need to say.
Thank you very much, Rihanna. I think that that's a very important point. On the international level, on the global front, we often talk of a multi-stakeholder policy-making environment. It's a notion that I think over time we've all come to accept, despite the challenges with how that works in reality. But there's very little argument now about that being the best approach to policy making internationally. At national levels in many countries, not so much. A lot of governments still see policy making, lawmaking as their exclusive preserve, and they necessarily are not open to the idea of other actors being involved in that process, which, again, as Benga said, it's really a tragedy because internet policy making requires a lot of competencies and expertise, and very often government does not have the requisite expertise across the range of issues that need to be taken into account. So by seeking to hog that policy making process for themselves, they undercut themselves, I think, because they are not able to factor in all of the technical issues, all of the social issues, and indeed all of the commitments to implementation that you would require from citizens who have been part of a policy-making environment. So I think that there's a lot of responsibility on us as civil society actors who traditionally do advocacy, not just to advocate about the issues, but also about the process. Because when you make laws and policies around internet freedom, around the digital environment, you need different communities. You need the technical communities, those that understand the technical issues involved in how the internet works and how digital platforms work to be able to craft policies around those issues. You need users also. And when you look at this stakeholder environment, in my respectful view, governments are usually behind the curve. They are, for the most part, less knowledgeable than the other stakeholders that they now seek to make laws that would govern them when they themselves are the least enlightened and knowledgeable about those issues. So I think as a critical stakeholder group, civil society actors need to be able to convince governments that they should open up that space so that they get all of the ideas that will make the laws and policies really top-notch. Obviously, ultimate responsibility would rest with them to pass those laws and policies. But in the conversations leading to the adoption of the laws and policies, they would have a rich harvest of ideas that they can pick from so that we really have laws and policies that respond to the environment for which they are being made, unlike the current situation where a lot of laws are just simply taken from other countries in other regions and adopted on our continent, in our different countries, without regard for the local contexts. So I think that as advocates, we need to be able to push our government to allow us to be heard in that process. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Edith. You're very right in that there's a lot of copy and paste. You see that on the continent, especially when you look at the cybersecurity frameworks. And you also realize that, most governments are acting to restrict freedom of expression rather than focusing their energies on actually mitigating against cyber threats. So for those who have just joined us, I just want to remind you that we're having a conversation with changemakers in the digital rights sector on the continent. And, it's such an honor to be on this platform and talking to African digital rights activists who are really changing, who are change makers, not just on the continent, but globally. And we have Dr. Grace Gitaiga here, Emily Gandhi, Editor Nojo, Benga Sasa, Arthur Gwagwa, and Dr. Tabani Moyo. So it's a great entry point for you, Dr. Grace Gitaiga. As the CEO and convener of Kenya ICT Action Network, KICTA Network, as we know you very well, you've been working, you've been at the forefront in building the capacity of selected populations. And, in this case, I'm really thinking about your work around women and access. And, taking off from what Benga and Edith both said and how you bring in governments. And what I'd like you to talk about is that how do we bring in, you talk about multi-stakeholder kind of participation, especially around online violence. What I'm seeing, and I think you have probably seen this, and when many of us are identifying, is that offline violence is manifesting online and then going back offline, and it's the cycle. And we're all still grappling with effective mitigation. Your work on this issue has been outstanding. So I'm going to borrow your words and ask, how can we be deliberate? How can we be intentional? And how can we be more conscious of that need to curb online violence? What do we need to do? How do we bring people and, all the multi-stakeholders into this conversation?
Thank you so much, Rihanna, and thanks to CIPESA for this recognition. It is indeed, it's been a journey, and thank you so much, even for the question. I am just smiling when I hear the words deliberate, intentional, and conscious effort, because I think they've become my favorite terms practically in all the conversations. And yes, at KICTANet, we do work especially with women, and it's women in all their diversities. So it's politicians, it's bloggers, it's the LGBTQ community, it's also other marginalized communities, such as those we are trying to support to work in community networks. So to your question, how to effectively curb online violence. I think one of the things that we must realize is that it is crucial to recognize and address the interconnectedness between offline and online manifestations of violence. And there are several ways, and I'm going to use the examples that KICTANet has done. One of, like a quick win is on raising awareness. And once you raise awareness about the link between offline and online violence, through targeted campaigns, through targeted conversations, through targeted trainings of different sessions, then and then you're working with women in all their diversity and bringing men on board so that they also understand and become ambassadors in this campaign. Then you out of our experience, we've seen that you end up empowering individuals who recognize the different forms of violence and start to understand the impacts and link that that offline versus online violence. The other thing is that we have promoted digital literacy through policy briefs, through thought leadership engagement, through town halls. And again, this is to equip individuals with digital literacy skills so that they're able to navigate online spaces safely and responsibly. Recently, we had an engagement on Twitter Space on the recent killings to bring in the link between technology and the killings of women, because we are getting to see that clear linkage where technology is being used, for online dating. And finally, when it's that time for the main meeting, the face-to-face meeting, we've seen in Kenya, so many girls have ended up being killed or being hurt so badly. So just promoting that digital literacy so that women can empower themselves and stay safe, especially in terms of how do they maintain digital security, how do they observe cyber hygiene, so that every time they engage online, then they're conscious of this. The other thing that has emerged is we've been trying to promote positive online culture. And again, this is linked to the offline culture where, there's that accusation, women are wearing short dresses, they are marketing themselves online, or they are selling themselves, they become call girls. That does not necessarily mean that they need to be abused online. It does not mean that they have to be end up being killed or even being harmed. I mean, online spaces should be safe spaces. And I think our work, our work means that we still have a lot of work to do. And finally, I want to talk about the need to foster collaborations and partnerships, that it is very important to foster collaboration among different stakeholders. You're talking of governments, because we want the government to actually support, legal and policy reforms. We want Parliament to support legal and policy reforms. We want civil society to be at the forefront in agitating for these digital rights, especially for women. We want tech companies to start working with organizations and civil society organizations in actually agreeing on ways of curbing some of these online abuses. We want academia to also spearhead research on how we can continue engaging and making these spaces safe, because there are new issues that are coming. There is AI that that is already posing to bring in new challenges that as digital rights activists, we must be prepared and positioned to deal with. So how do we address this? And, that engagement, that collaboration with stakeholders to develop strategies for addressing online violence will be very critical. And in this, I'm also looking forward, if there are any people who provide resources here, donors, that it's also important to consider continuous and sustainable provision of resources to civil society organizations that are working in this area, so that we continue building expertise, we continue creating that awareness, we continue empowering women with digital literacy, and so that we can have effective prevention or strong intervention measures and support mechanisms for this. So thank you.
Thanks, Grace, for that very insightful response. Emila, obviously I'm going to turn to you because, one of the things that Grace mentioned is collaboration. And I know that as advocates around digital rights, one of the things that many people are trying to look at is, this kind of interaction with big tech around the very big issues, especially around elections, online harassment and hate speech, that occurs. And in fact, you've talked about the fact that it warrants detailed attention. So almost so far, all the speakers have talked about how we've all got to work better together and more together. So when you mentioned, the need to enhance regional collaboration among different African stakeholders, how do we build that bridge to a more collaborative but also equitable relationship with big tech? Right now, Africa is the continent that's not seen as a partner with leverage. But, so how do we ensure that we can leverage for a more equitable relationship and working partnership with big tech?
Thank you so much, Rihanna, for that question, and for everyone who is participating, and congratulations to CIPESA for turning 20. This is a very important question. I think, when you talked, collaboration, I was like, okay, how would I have answered this when I was still in civil society, and now, in big tech, as you say. One of the most important things, which like Dr. Gitaiga has already mentioned, is that there's a need for sustained collaboration. I've seen in many spaces where initiatives are once off, and when you come back the following year or the following 6 months, that initiative is gone already. So I think it's important to have that sustained collaboration. But before we even go to the sustained collaboration, the most important thing for me is really to build trust and building those relationships. Without trust, there is no collaboration. I believe there's no collaboration. And we also know that there's a trust deficit between civil society and the industry. And building that trust is really, really important. There are several ways that we can do that, and that we've been doing that and trying to do that. And it has worked in some spaces, and in some spaces we're still exploring how to ensure that that continues. So building trust is something that's important. The other thing for me also is, linked to building trust, is building and sustaining relationships. So not only talking to stakeholders or civil society when you need something, but talking to stakeholders and civil society, even just listening and participating in conversations as a participant and observing, I think in itself is also very beneficial, in ensuring that that collaboration continues or it starts as well. So listening, supporting, being a collaborative partner. The other point that I think is important is recognizing the expertise that lies in civil society. Oftentimes I see a lot of us within industry looking for expertise elsewhere other than civil society. As someone who was part of civil society, I know there is a lot of expertise in civil society. Just look around this room. There's a lot of expertise that is in there. So you see not only big tech, but donors or grant partners, I think that's what they are called now, looking for other people to fund and then sub-granting to civil society. So I think recognizing and acknowledging that the civil society has that expertise. And I'm not talking about just, intellectual expertise, but also lived experiences and having the contextual information, that can also help with collaboration. And I think that can also help with equitable relationships. It's a loaded word to say equitable relationships, but I think, that can also help. The last thing that I would say is transparency. I think we can all sing from the collaboration hymn book, but if we are not transparent about what we are doing, who is who, from our side as industry, it's difficult to build relationships. It's difficult to build trust, and in the end, very difficult to actually collaborate with someone that you don't know as well.
Emila, that's very interesting. So when you say transparency and trust, I'm going to throw back a question at you. Can you be more specific? Because we look at big tech and think, okay, we're not really getting transparency from them, and that trust factor. So I guess you're looking at us, we're looking at you. But for us, as digital rights activists, freedom of expression advocates, what would you unpack that for us? Give us a more solid sort of understanding of that.
I can see Benga was grinning ear to ear, saying yes. I would want you to expand on that. So let me start with transparency and some of the things that we have done. I think transparency means a lot to, it means different things to a lot of people. But for us, for the work that I do in my team around policy development, so the team that I am on is the one that engages with external stakeholders like yourselves in this meeting to build our community standards. And what we do is that we don't just, gather feedback and then hide somewhere and start writing the policies, but we discuss what's the problem, what's the issue that's at hand? How are we trying to solve it? What are some of the examples that we've seen? Bring some of the, external stakeholders into the process. I think Edet mentioned, the importance of process as well. So bringing along stakeholders to see what exactly is it that we are doing, how have we used the feedback that you have given us, and what's the decision, how was the decision made? So actually inviting stakeholders to be part of the conversation in where the decision is being made and what that decision is. That's a small example of how we're trying to be transparent, but also I would really appreciate, even from some of the participants on where they think, it would be really good to have more transparency. But I would give that example. In terms of trust, trust is a difficult thing to build, but one of the things that we've been really focusing on as a team, and as a company as well, is really building trust with underrepresented groups, because they are not usually at the table when policy development is being done, and inviting them to be part of the conversation because they are already contributing in their own spaces. So that's one of the things that we've been doing. Of course, quite a lot to still be done, but those are some of the initiatives that we are working on.
Thanks. Thanks very much, Emila. By the way, I just want to remind everyone, including the, Changemakers, this is a conversation. So if there's a question that you want to ask, or you want to, you want any one of you to kind of elaborate on something, please feel free to, sort of come in and make your intervention. And to the over 100 participants that are out there listening to this conversation, you're more than welcome to put in your questions, and I'm quite happy to ask our change makers, any of the questions you want them to respond to. So obviously, Tabani, I'm going to turn to you. After ending the conversation with Emila around collaboration, that's one of the things I know you're trying to build in Southern Africa. And so my question would be, how do you build that kind of collaboration? Because, you're trying to, the big thing is to have that regional solidarity and continental solidarity to really push for changes, right? And you've identified censorship and surveillance as the massive threats to internet freedom. So, and saying that, you've talked about how we're experiencing it. It's a continuously growing threat. We've seen that very recently, the two journalists in Togo who have had spyware identified. How do we do the two things, build that regional solidarity, push for change, and build groundswell across the continent in a way that will contribute to to what you've been advocating for?
Thank you very much, Rihanna, and congratulations to CIPESA on its 2-decade-long existence, but also to appreciate the initiative to sort of identify those who are contributing in their small way to the change narratives around digital rights, with the hope that we'll move to the next level of building the critical mass needed to keep this issue on the agenda. The issue of collaboration, issues of technology's impact on escalating our vulnerability as humanity, and the issue of moving forward is a critical one. Collaboration, firstly, in a sense that the subject matter is too huge for any subgroup to attend to it single-handedly, and is too huge to be broken down into digestible chunks by anyone in isolation. Hence the need for connecting the dots across the continent, not only living at the continental level, but ensuring that we also meaningfully contribute to global initiatives and debates, arguments that will be taking place pertaining to the same. with a shift, a decade in reflection to the change makers who have been identified, a shift that is happening concurrently with many other shifts in terms of technology and other variables that are dealing with humanity and issues of war, issues of conflict, issues of hunger, climate change, among others. How do you sustain structured interventions? Requires strategic intent, requires deliberateness, that you come up with mechanisms that allow to build scale. And the first frontier that I always insist on is that possibly it is time that we escalate the need for a commonly agreed framework on collaboration. I'm happy that at IFEX we have started the process of coming with principles that can guide something which can bind us, because collaboration is not a diplomatic word that you use to hide unpleasant actions or words. But there's need to be clear what is collaboration. How do you build organic movements that sustain their actions from generation to the next, as we are saying, pertaining to issues of digital rights? And that requires everyone hands on the decks in terms of contributing to a level of a framework that can define our existence. The second issue is that we need to invest in leadership development. The change makers identified today, how do you build on scale and ensure that you build a new layer of civic activists who understand and who are equipped on this moving target of digital rights, which changes rapidly. A decade is too long a time. I know now we are dealing with the impact of AI, but we haven't even started scratching on ensuring that everyone is on the platform, issues of access, that they're accessing information meaningfully, not in promotions, because of the shift of services such as education, issues of justice, online access of justice services, issues of health. How do you maintain a secure, non-vulnerable individual who is accessing these services online? Worse off, as we also migrate with digital identities, how do you maintain an individual's rights safeguarded within that mechanism? Further, if we are going to connect the dots, we also need to understand that the capabilities are coming from across different groupings. And we need to be as inclusive as is possible because this is the platform for all. We have seen this collaborative work happening, as Emila said, and as colleagues who spoke before me also alluded to, that each and every one of us should contribute to the building blocks, like how we have managed to come with, for example, Windhoek Declaration, Windhoek Plus 30, which is now an instrumental soft law that is articulating the key issues of how humanity should be preserved in a changing environment. Issues of the declaration at the ACHPR, these are relations that have been sustained over years at African Union, at UN, among civil society, the academia, the media, and multiple stakeholders. How do we escalate this consensus and ensure that the issues of digital rights in the next 10 years, when we have increased computing capabilities and artificial intelligence taking center stage, that humanity is not lost when we are focusing on technology, but technology is developing to save and preserve humanity, so that there is always a shield that protects the user and their rights. So in a nutshell, these are my initial reflections, but we'll be happy to continue to engage. Thank you, Ryan.
Thanks very much, Tabani. Yeah, it is. I think the biggest challenge we have is to, really solidify these regional and continental partnerships. And, how do we ensure that sort of organic flow of, work and advocating for rights? Which brings me to you, Arthur. Certainly, you may be, the last of the change makers to have a question, but certainly not the least. In your paper, Authoritarian Alliances and Data Politicking in Africa, you identified the lack of substantial research on, we know that there's a lot of information out there, a lot of research, a lot of documentation, but you identified the lack of substantial research on the acquisition of large-scale digital data by African authoritarian governments with the backing of foreign actors. And you said that, we need to upscale our advocacy to spotlight the human rights implications of this data collation. So, of course, we don't have time to go into a detailed conversation, but outline for us as best you can how we can remedy this.
Thanks, Rihanna. Thanks, colleagues. Thanks, Sipesa, and congratulations for, attaining the age of majority. As we know, I think for the past 4 years, data has become the new oil, I think, and there's, so much interest by governments, by the corporate world in data. So it is a defining factor, not just in the promotion of rights, but also in the violation of rights. So I think what has been happening when it comes to data, because they are foreign interests. So most of the money that is being invested in biometric data, digital identities, is coming from foreign governments or foreign big tech, and European data analytics companies and data brokers are involved. So we've got a situation of the democratic Western states that have previously promoted human rights, being involved in violation of human rights. So that creates a complication. I'm sorry for the interruption. So I think what is actually needed is that I think the research that we are seeing in Africa is more reactionary, civil society, fighting big tech, fighting governments, when in fact, I think what we also need is proactive research, like what we see at the European Center for Development Policy, where if foreign governments and big tech are giving money to governments, for biometric digital identity programs, they also need to involve civil society and academics right from the start, so that the research that we have spotlights on the ignorance, the potential areas where we might have some problems. So we should be seeing the paradigm initiatives, the CPESAs, being part of the grant making right from the start, so that we dispel the ignorance, we address the ignorance, but also that we mitigate against the problems that might arise consequentially. But coming to the issue of research to spotlight, I think maybe the only comprehensive research that I know on big data is by Elena Powers, who is probably American. And for us African researchers, we normally do anecdotal advocacy, but without really having knowledge about what exactly we are talking about, because we're not part of the programs in the first place. But if we had been included in the initial project planning, we would know more about the problems that are taking place. So finally, I think maybe there is need for continuous structuring of grant making. It's happening right now. We are seeing Research ICT Africa, the Internet Observatory for AI for development. We are beginning to see nimble and better structured grants that allows them to use the money the way they want to meet African objectives, not to meet what the funders want. So I think that is a plus. We are beginning to see more collaborations. For example, Paradigm Initiative and CPESA, they work together. That's a plus as well. But we want to see African organizations taking more lead in terms of structuring the money and the grants that we need for research, because money is very important for research. We cannot do research without the flexibility that we need to choose whoever we want to partner with, whoever we want to work with, what issues we want to focus on. Thank you.
So, and very interesting points that you bring across. It's not only that they lead in terms of, the grant-making process, but surely we also have to be offered, a seat at the table, because just, here as panelists, we have you, all of you as change makers. There are many organizations doing, groundbreaking work on the continent, but are not brought to international platforms in the way that other digital rights experts are. Do you see that that's something that has to change as well? The way we are seen from the African continent, because we offer a lot in terms of, best practice, in terms of advocacy, in terms of, identifying the issues that are pertinent to us, but that are not really being discussed because, there are other conversations that dominate the landscape, such as AI, and, other issues. What do you think?
Yes, of course, this is, I think, part of the colonial legacy. I think, sorry to say this, because I know maybe some might not actually want to hear that, but it has got more to do with, I think, the logistical issues. African researchers, sometimes, are not allowed to go to the places where the decisions are being made because of visa issues. You may be given a visa. I've seen sometimes maybe Benga coming to the meeting late because the visa came late. These things happen. We know if someone, I think of status of Benga, cannot get a visa on time, how about a grassroots activist? I think it's much more problematic. So yes, I think I've seen improvements, coming especially from the IDRC. That's a much more, I think, a friend of Africa, a true friend of Africa. And, CEDAR, I've seen, I think, maybe the Danish, but also I think some American grant makers like, the Open Technology Fund. They are doing fantastic work because they are coming to Africa instead. They come to Nigeria, they come to Uganda. So they tell us that, guys, we are coming. I'm going to be sitting at that corner. You can come and talk to us. So we want to see more of that happening. But we want to see more Africans being involved in initial grant making, like, the structuring of the deals. We want to see more Africans sitting at the table. I have been in the OTF and advisory board. Right now, I'm on the board with Internet Society. Yeah, but sometimes I feel that I think we are involved later in the stage, when in fact, I think what we actually need is for Africans, we've got more experience, Africans like me, I think, to be involved in the process of negotiating with Congress. Say OTF or maybe ISOC is being given money by Congress, to be involved at that stage, to say, I think we want Africa to be given this part of the cake. We don't want to be right at the end when in fact the money has already been made. Because I think our grant partners in America and in Europe have to trust us. We work with them. I work at Utrecht. We work with them. I won't really come at that table with corrupt ideas to say, no, I'm going to give money to Emil, I'm going to give money to Grace. They have to trust that Africans, they are also Africans who are not corrupt, who are very objective. So I think that's what we need. And also we want more donors to engage the grassroots, to come to Africa, to come to our meetings. And that is already happening, but it could be scaled up. Thank you.
No, thanks very much for that, Arthur. And I think, food for thought is that we encourage that before, biometric, hardware and tools are given to governments, that we are involved in the process as civil society, as the public, because I think this is an issue we can all coalesce around, no matter where we are on the digital rights landscape, either as consumers or advocates. And that, it is something that we can really build solidarity around and, collaboration. And as borrowing from Grace, I'm going to make these my 3 mantra words too. We can be deliberate, intentional, and conscious, around the way we do that. So there's a question from Henriette at APC, who says, congratulations to CIPESA. A question for all the change makers. what is the one change you're most proud to have contributed to? And I know that Benga is on a time crunch, so I'm going to start off with him, if that's okay.
Thank you. That's a tough question, and I'll end with it. Just to say a few things before that. I've heard the word collaboration a lot today, and I'm glad that we're saying this. Collaboration is a verb, and I say that deliberately because I know we've been talking a lot about collaboration for a long time, but I don't think we're doing enough of it. I don't think we're doing enough of it, and I think that we need to be more conscious. And there are two dimensions to this. There is the dimension of us working with us, and I think we've improved a lot on that. A lot of us on this call are actually like friends, beyond work, and so it's very easy to say, "Oh, Grace, I'm doing this meeting. Please, you have to be there. Clear your calendar," and that makes it a bit easy, right? And vice versa. But there is the other sense of collaboration across silos. We have challenges with the private sector, which is why Emila was smiling earlier. I have a very interesting relationship with the Facebooks, Metas, and Googles and co of this world. On one hand, we're working together, we're doing projects that we agree. On the other hand, I'm calling them out and saying, "Hey, why on earth would you do something that's stupid?" And it makes sense because it is a relationship built on principles. And we need to do the same thing when it comes to stakeholders. We don't have that kind of relationship with just yet. And I'm speaking of government. 4 years ago, things started an experiment. We started training security agencies in Nigeria, and that has spread beyond that now. We started training security agencies, we started training judges, we started training parliamentarians. And what we realized was that there are people in those sectors, in those silos, who don't have any clue what we're talking about. Every time they hear civil society, they're thinking activism, they're thinking they've come again. But when we are under the same roof and have conversations, they're able to understand some of the things that we're talking about. And in fact, they are able to understand. And I remember having a conversation with the Cameroonian government, very strange at the time, when they were shutting down the internet, and explained to them, listen, this is actually against your own interest. And I think for the very first time, one of the directors from the ministry looked at us and said, "That's true. I don't have access to." And I think it's important to have those conversations. And that is the essence of collaboration. It will be difficult, but we need to have them. If there's one thing, to answer Andre's question, if there's one thing that I think that Paradigm Initiative has contributed to this, I think that we're pretty big on creative communications. It's expensive to produce a short film every year. But what we learned is that many of our reports, we read the reports, people on this call read our reports. People on this call will read their reports. But people outside our small circle of digital rights don't read these things. So we started investing in creative communications, taking the message where the people are. A short film in English, in French, and in Swahili. By the way, some of the biggest challenges that we've had over the last 10 years are from Francophone Africa, where many of us literally don't pay attention to. These are some of the biggest challenges. I mean, with what has happened in ECOWAS right now, we should understand that the politics of Anglo-Franco-Lusophone is something that we have to understand and work around in terms of communications. So I think that's one thing that we've contributed. We take our annual report on digital rights and we convert it into a short film. The reports are about 400 pages long. Not even I, who am editor-in-chief, I think I only read it twice. So while I'm editing, and then maybe again when I'm bored on a flight or something like that. So nobody reads 400 pages. But a 20-minute short film that is fun, that has characters that are award winners, you will watch that. But two other quick things. One is engagement of processes, and I think this is important. And I'm trying to squeeze as many things as possible because I know I didn't get a chance to say my final words. Engaging with ongoing processes. I know that many of us are fighting fires where we are. Local fires, regional fires, sub-regional fires, even global fires. But there are global processes that we cannot ignore. The WSIS Plus 20 process and the entire IGF, we can't just listen to what people say about it without giving adequate input. The entire Global Digital Compact in the Summit of the Future, we must find a way of linking our action on the ground with sub-regional, with regional, and with global processes so that when we go to these conversations, they're not just about theory. And I think it was Arthur who said earlier that some of the themes that are discussed at times do not connect with some of the reality we have. And I think we need to turn that on its head. And finally, since it's been talked about, funding models. Everybody loves success. We're all celebrating September today that they're here at 20. If there was no support, the lights will not be on. They won't be here. I've been saying this for the last few years and I'll keep saying it again. The funding model where you give people money to run projects and they have nothing left to pay their team members does not work. Bury it. It's in the past. We need multi-year unrestricted support. If you're going to support, let it be full support to keep the lights on. As a sector, we have to attract and retain talent so that we don't lose all our talent to certain sectors who, once they smile at our people, to be honest, I wouldn't be able to resist some of those things myself. So I think it's really important. Yes, collaboration is a verb. We need to talk about, creative communications. We must engage, processes, and the funding models have to change. It is impossible to say that you want success to happen without investing in keeping the lights on, in attracting the right talent, and in making sure that institutions do not die off before their 20th year. And even when we're celebrating 20, we're looking forward to the 100th year. And congratulations again, Sepesa.
Thanks, Benga. I think it ties up to what Emila was saying, that, a lot of our work has to be sustainable. But in order for it to be sustainable, we have to have funding models that ensure that sustainability, that allow for it, in terms of technical resources, but also financial resources. So, this is definitely something we should consider. And you're very right, that the whole collaboration issue, but also, Francophone, Lusophone, and Anglophone Africa are not connecting as well as they should. And how do we do that, especially around the work that we do, and, ensuring that that information is available across those, language barriers. Yes, I agree, totally. So maybe I can move on to Arthur this time and say, and ask Henriette's question once again. What's the one big change you're most proud of?
I think maybe seeing us, maybe the older generation, moving on and leaving younger people to be more active. I think especially women and girls in Africa, I think they've been disadvantaged for many years. I think seeing them in leadership positions and calling the shots, for me, I think I could never be prouder as a father and as a colleague to see that happening.
That's a very interesting answer, especially with, what Tabani was saying, that, in terms of leadership, we have to leave something behind. And I think, just talking to you all as change makers, you all sit with institutional memory, you sit with decades of work, often when young people come in, I know they often say, you're so lucky you're doing this. And I think luck has very little to do with it. It's years and years of focusing on something and, growing with it and sticking with it. So yeah, thanks for that.
Can I just maybe add to that? But sometimes I also see a bit of laziness where someone can think they can use the ticket of feminism to become a leader, or you have to work. I think young girls, you have to work in order for you to be leaders. You can't just say, because I'm a girl, I'm a woman. Then, because Benga has been working on this for many years. He's younger than me, but he's been in the game for longer. So I think we want Africans, I think whether you're a girl, woman, let's not use, I think, the gender card to try to rise. Use your merit, work hard. I'm old enough, I think, to be a father to some of you, but I work hard. Because in order for Africa to be lifted, we need to work hard. I think that's all I can say.
I'm going to intervene there, Arthur. Many of us work double. Many of us women work twice as hard to be recognized. But anyway.
Yeah, no, because I know there were some issues when I was in activism, sometimes when people try to undermine you, because they don't know that sometimes I go to dangerous countries. I am where I am because I work hard, because I've put my life in the harm's way. So sometimes that's why I'm a change maker. So we all have to be prepared to do that. And I'm not just maybe trying to deride girls and women, even men as well. Let's work hard, because that's very important. Thank you.
Grace, what is the thing that you're most proud of? And I know there's many things that you can be proud of. Or should I say Dr. Grace Kitaiga?
Yes, there are many things. You're right. There are many things that I can be proud of. And from a personal level, I think the fact that I was able to tweak from, working in media, so mainly in radio, and then just tweaking that into ICT policy and advocacy, and actually becoming one of the people who are doing change making. From an organizational level, I am very proud to have transformed Kictanet from an email list. Kictanet was an email list for a very long time into a formidable institution that is now tackling and solving real tech policy concerns, not just in Kenya, but even in the world. And Kictanet is always evolving. So I am very proud of that, because the issues we are dealing with, those are relevant and very important to the people. I think we also need to pay attention to the fact that the big change in the digital rights and tech policy landscape is increasing. And the focus is moving more to digital inclusion and the impact of digital technologies on human rights and development. And so this shift is characterized by efforts to ensure that people can use and benefit from the digital information, from the products, from services, equally and equitably. And it has not always been like that. So I'm really proud that I have been able to steer Kictanet into that, including on stakeholder engagement, that we are able to engage with different stakeholders in the tech industry, and not just locally, but even globally. So thank you very much.
Thanks for that, Grace. Yes, you have really been very instrumental in that sort of stakeholder engagement. Kenya's, quite an example to follow, especially around many of the issues. Edison, I'll turn over to you. Again, you too, like everyone that's, part of this panel, you have a lot to be proud of. What's the one thing you really, that stands out for you?
Thanks again, Rihanna. When I started doing this work, there was really no normative framework or standard to guide advocacy efforts. The thing I'm most proud of, or at least one of them, it's contributing to the emergence of normative frameworks and standards on the continent. Beginning with the African Declaration on Internet Rights and Freedom, which I worked on with a number of other colleagues, including Henriette, who asked this question, and putting that in place to guide law and policy making across the continent was a very important development for us. And that also led shortly afterwards to the adoption of the Declaration of Principles on Freedom of Expression and Access to Information in Africa, which myself and a number of other colleagues worked with the Special Rapporteur on Freedom of Expression and Access to Information in Africa and the African Commission to develop, which contains, I think, very far-reaching standards and principles that we are also now using for litigation and other forms of advocacy in different cases. So I'm very proud of those efforts. Thank you.
Yes, and I know that many of us benefit from the work that you have, the policy frameworks that you have been engaged in. So yes, I think that's a legacy you truly do leave behind. Tabani, I'll turn to you. And what is it that you're most proud of, especially, moving from, director in Zimbabwe to a regional director and working across, the Southern African region?
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much. I think my most proud moments are around seeing a movement organically evolving. The way conditions, when we started doing the work, wherein you would see a north-south contractual obligation forcing people to be together. But the ability of an African-informed mindset to think and African groups coming together for a common objective, sustaining it over a period of time, be it from awareness, literacy issues. Ed spoke about the soft laws, connecting the dots beyond our local realities to global scales, and that ability to continuously sustain activism on an identified issue of digital rights over these many years, wherein CIPESA then turns into adulthood, and ability to also see smaller CIPESAs emerging, so that they can also emerge to become the frontiers of new struggles beyond the current ones. We spoke that the shifts are happening faster, that this is a moving target, issues of computing capabilities, AI, big data, among others. They will require new sets of a pair of hands to take them forward, specifically to those who are currently marginalized. One of the soft laws that I really, as a resolution 522, is a critical one, and it requires a very brave generation to come through, take over the leadership mantle, and sustain it, which is why I agree, Benga, that the funding models, if we are to be a proud collective, should allow us to have that collaboration mix, which is highly ecosystem-centered, supporting every minute player within the ecosystem in a sustainable way to develop complex mindsets that can tackle complex challenges in future. Thank you.
And Emila, it's certainly not the least. Can I ask the same question of you?
Thank you, Rihanna. I don't know if it's politically correct for me to say one of the things that I'm proud of, but I was watching AFCON yesterday, and South Africa is now in the quarterfinals. So, so that's something that I'm proud of. So congratulations to Bafana. In terms of professionally, and trust Henriette to be the one asking the most difficult question. I'm so proud of contributing to some of tech policy initiatives that are still ongoing and that are impactful, like the African Internet Governance School, the AfriSIG. It's not my brainchild. I contributed to it with Henriette and many others. And for me, what's gratifying is seeing some of the students or some of the people who passed through the African Internet Governance School doing impactful work in tech, in government, in civil society. And really, for me, it just shows, I think, the importance of such initiatives. I think we talk about capacity building, sometimes it's an afterthought, but I think it's really, really important. If we are to continue being change makers or having more change makers, there's still a need to build the capacity of the people who contribute in these frameworks that Edet was talking about to meaningfully contribute in those spaces. As someone who is in the industry now, there are oftentimes when you engage with people and you're like, I wish they'd gone through through the African Internet Governance School, because there's just so much there. And I hope it's one of the initiatives that will continue being supported as well. And I have a comment on Arthur's note around the gender card. Arthur, we will continue using the gender card. We are women, and it's not something that someone can tell us not to do. We'll do it. But thank you for your comment.
So there are quite a number of questions, but I thought Henriette's question kind of brought everything together, especially the different responses. And I think this is quite an appropriate moment to sort of, conclude this webinar on this note where our change makers talk about, the legacy that they are most proud of. And I also think it sets the stage for, FIFA 2024 and the conversations, around, the grants, the allocation of grants and the way they're put, being sort of, the model of funding has to be relooked at. The issue around the fact that we work in silos and we've got to find ways to to connect better and more effectively. The big issues on the continent, disinformation, misinformation, online violence, hate speech. How do we coalesce around those and make some kind of meaningful change and mitigate against it? Because it's, as all of you have mentioned, and particularly Tabani, the digital landscape is very fluid, fast moving, and we've got to find ways to really, advocate for issues, but also see change and see positive change, against very negative impacts of digital technology. I think there was a lot of talk about how do we, coalesce around a particular issue and how do we do it with all the stakeholders involved, We've got to find entry points, not just for each other, but also, bringing in governments, bringing in your communities that are impacted, bringing them to the table. And these are not easy things to do. They're not something we can answer in the session, but at least I feel that we've sparked, people's imagination. We've got them to think around the major issues. I want to, thank all the change makers here, Dr. Grace Gitaiga, Emila Gandhi, Edison Ojo, Dr. Tabani Moyo, Benya Sasa, and Arthur Gwagwa. It's been a very interesting conversation. Thank you to CEPESA, most of all, for all the work that they do and for bringing everyone together and for highlighting the change makers in their report, the decade old, the report reflecting on the last decade. And I think this is where we can say goodbye to each other.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye. Cheers.
I
Thank you. Bye. Congratulations, CEPESA team.
Bye. Thank you.
Ciao, everyone.